Welcome everybody. It's great to be back. I know I've been gone for a minute. Just been really busy with stuff. But I have a great show for you today. I hope you guys have enjoyed Mel's videos. I know she's been pumping them out like crazy. And so kudos to her. And today, what we're going to be talking about is money. And so you guys are listening to Logic and Reason. As a quick note, I have to remind everyone to like and subscribe. This is Logic and Reason. I know that Mel has had a really nice can open. I'm still developing that one. I need to remember what she said. But basically, this is a show that talks about different issues in politics and social issues, as well as things that happen within the black culture. Today's topic, we are going to be talking about campaign financing. You might ask, this is kind of random. Maybe not asking that question. I would ask myself, this is kind of random. Where did this come from? Well, a couple of weeks ago, a ma'am named Cori Bush had an issue. She just lost her campaign, lost her election, and she had a speech in front of all of her supporters, and she said some really interesting words. And so that kind of sparked this whole curiosity in me to investigate. So let's go into that actual speech.
The first congressional district primary race turned out to be the second most expensive in U.S. history, with over $18 million raised and spent.
And let me say this. AIPAC, I'm coming to tear your kingdom down.
Wesley Bell received most of the outside funding. His campaign was financed almost entirely by the pro-Israel lobby. He has served as St. Louis County prosecuting attorney for 6 years.
And so this sparked a very interesting point, and that is, what is the role of money in our campaigns? She mentioned that AIPAC was the main contributor to her opponent's campaign. I think they pledged $8.5 million for that campaign. And then we found out from the news story that it was the vast majority of his financing. So I first wanted to ask the question, well, how did we get here? Things aren't just random. There's steps to everything. So what were the baby steps to get to this point? And so I had to go into the very first Federal Elections Campaign Act that happened in 1971. This was right after the whole Watergate situation, if you guys are familiar with Watergate and all the crap that happened with that with Richard Nixon. And so, Congress was like, look, we have to stop corruption. We need to do something about corruption. Let's pass this bill and let's get some stuff on the books. So this bill allowed for limits on the amount of money an individual could contribute to a single campaign. It required reporting for contributions above a certain threshold. It also added some penalties in the criminal code. And it created this office to facilitate the governance of all this stuff. So we have now the Federal Elections Commission to enforce the statute. I have a YouTuber by the name of Himmler's History. He had a very nice recap of the Buckley versus Vallejo Supreme Court ruling. If you guys don't know a little bit about what this is, again, we're only talking about 5 years after this act was passed. There were some issues, and so somebody took those issues to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled on it. I'm going to let him kind of finish the rest.
In 1976, the court took up this limitation of spending and ruled that spending money on political campaigns is tightly tied to the First Amendment's protection of the freedom of speech. And you're like, what? Like, how is spending money on campaigns related to free speech? Well, it's not that hard to understand. Like, if you want to share your endorsement for a candidate with the people around you, you have the freedom to do so. But what if you want to share that endorsement with more than the people around you? What if you want to share it with everyone in America? Well, you could visit every household in the nation and say it with your mouth whole, but just in case you want to finish that task in fewer than than 700 years, you're probably going to have to spend money and make advertisements. You need to make ads for television and online sources and social media, and that is very expensive. So you can see that if there was a law capping how much you could spend to make those advertisements, that it would be the equivalent of restricting your freedom of speech. And that's the part about how much a candidate can spend on their campaign. But the case also took up the related problem of how much an individual could give to a candidate. If there are no limits on how much a person or group can spend on a campaign, then that might create a problem. In a system like that, who has the loudest voice? Well, it's the one with the most money. It's kind of like the list of commandments in Animal Farm, the last of which says all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So yes, technically speaking, we all have equal access to free speech, but if money equals speech, at least in politics, then there are some folks that are more equal than others. And so what the court did in the Buckley decision was a little complicated, but stick with me. Basically what the court did was to uphold the part of the law that restricted the amount of money an individual could contribute to a candidate. That, in their opinion, was the key to a free and fair election. However, they did strike down the part of the law that restricted how much a candidate could spend on their campaign. That kind of restriction was deemed a violation of the First Amendment. Okay, so thankfully after that, the matter of campaign finance was settled, except that it wasn't.
Right. So, basically they saw that these practices, the restrictions on expenditures, wasn't really the main issue. They wanted to make sure that the main issue was the contribution part of the process, right? And so because the limitations on expenditures wasn't necessarily the driving force behind stopping corruption, they thought that that was unconstitutional. And so it really didn't need to be something that would infringe on rights, specifically the First Amendment. So just to recap that, they struck down the limits on expenditures of candidates. They struck down the limits on independent expenditures for different groups. And they said that the restriction on spending for political communication reduces the quality of expression, your freedom of speech. This also led to some amendments on that original bill that was passed in 1971. Then we fast forward to 2010 with the Citizens United ruling in the Supreme Court. At this point, we have a majority conservative court headed by, I think, Roberts. Justice Roberts is the head honcho here. But by a 5-4 ruling, the majority maintained that under the First Amendment, corporations funding in campaign elections cannot be limited. So now we're talking about corporations. And so political speech is indispensable in the democracy, which is no less true for the speech that comes from a corporation. This was widely debated. Justice Stevens argued that corporations are not members of society, and they should curb the corporation's ability to spend money in local and national elections. However, Justice Scalia wrote in a separate congruent opinion, joined by Alito and Thomas, criticizing Stevens's understanding of the framers' view towards corporations. And I was like, okay, so what is the view towards corporations? So after looking at that, this really stems from English common law, right? And so English common law kind of set the groundwork for how we view a corporation. And corporations should have some type of rights because they do things in society. They buy property, right? They enter into contracts. They can be sued. They can sue. And so they have legal status. And this legal status is necessary to being able to do business with people separate from the owners and shareholders of the said business. So in the case of Buckley and Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations as legal persons have the right to free speech, which includes the ability to spend money in political activities. So that sets the groundwork for that. A lot of people disagreed with this. There's actually a pact that is trying to mitigate some of this stuff. And so again, it's debatable, but that's what the Supreme Court ruled at that time. So we've talked now about why there was rules put down, right? We talked about now the infringement on free speech. We've discussed the corporations also have the ability to have free speech. And now let's get into the wealthy part of the equation. So the rich folks. And to illustrate this point, we go to Birmingham, Alabama by a man named Sean. He was a resident there, a Republican, and he must have had some serious cash. because he's over here dropping dimes on everybody. So he gave $33,000 to 16 federal candidates during the 2011 and 2012 election cycle. He also desired to contribute $25,000 to each of the 3 Republican National Party committees during the same cycle, but was restricted by the aggregate limit of contributions to political committees. And then he intended to donate a further $60,000 to various candidates. But he was reaching that limit on how much you can give in elections. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to take this to the Supreme Court. And so now we have another Supreme Court case happening in 2014, and with the same justices for the most part. And they decided that the overall limit on how much money a person can give to all candidates combined does not really prevent corruption, which is the main goal of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. At the same time, the limit forces donors to choose between candidates that they can support, which restricts their ability to fully participate in elections, according to them. Since this limit doesn't effectively prevent corruption, it doesn't pass the strict standards required by the First Amendment, and they ruled it as unconstitutional. So now we are lifting the limits on, how many candidates and how much money you can give politically. I think there's still limits on how much you can give to an individual person, but yes. They did agree that, we do need to fight corruption, and corruption, fighting corruption is important, but it should not unnecessarily limit free speech. The freedom of speech thing is something that was really important. It is a part of the Constitution, and as the job of the Supreme Court, they're supposed to uphold the Constitution, right? The issues always stem from the interpretation of said Constitution. But that was essentially what their goal was. So they were saying, hey, look, based off of this, it's unconstitutional. So what are the consequences of all this stuff? These decisions collectively established and reinforced a legal doctrine that spending money in the political process is a form of protected speech under the First Amendment. This interpretation has profound implications on campaign finance in this country, and it leads to the current landscape of vast sums of money, often from wealthy individuals, corporations, and special interest groups, playing a central role in our elections. And so now I had another question. I was like, okay, I have an understanding of how we got here, but now I want to know who's spending the money. Like, who are the bigger players here, or the biggest players in this game of money that's being played? I didn't really have an understanding of how much money we're even talking about, so I had to look that up first. And there is a lot of money being spent. I mean, really, the thing that jumps out to me the most, according to usafacts.org, they said between January 2023 and April 2024 that there was $8.6 billion that has been spent on the House, Senate, and presidential elections. $8.6 billion. And $5.6 billion of that $8.6 billion were from PACs, which, if you guys don't know, maybe I missed it, but PACs are political action committees. So that's amazing. I mean, how much money is really being pumped into this system here. Of course, I had to go back to my friend from Heinler's History to tell us a little bit more about PACs.
On one kind of organization called a political action committee, more commonly known as a PAC. These are organizations that raise money for the sake of influencing the population to vote for their preferred candidate, and there are 3 kinds that I want you to know. First are connected PACs, and those are formed by corporations or other entities like labor unions. It's a PAC that's connected to these organizations. So connected PACs can only collect funds from the members of their organization, and that money can be donated directly to candidates in limited quantities. However, they can raise unlimited amounts of money provided the individual limits are obeyed. Second are non-connected PACs, which are formed independently of an organization, usually around a specific public interest like gun rights or women in politics. Again, as in connected PACs, donations to non-connected PACs are limited by law. They can accept donations from anyone in the public and donate directly to candidates. Third are super PACs, which have proliferated widely since the Citizens United decision. Super PACs can be formed by anyone, can accept unlimited donations, but cannot directly coordinate with the candidate. And these are the most controversial kind of PACs because critics argue that super PACs have the potential to limit democracy and give voice only to the wealthy, and there we are right back again to the free speech problem.
Right. And so what I've kind of as I've been digging through this, and again, I'm not, this isn't a full comprehensive view on this issue. However, there are some key themes that I've kind of noticed. And it seems like the real damage is being done with the super PACs. And I have a slide that kind of goes into further detail. But there is a key difference here, and that is the difference between hard money and soft money. So the hard money is contributions that are given directly to candidates. Soft money is money that is donated to a party or a group to buy ads on behalf of that candidate. Now, they did make some rules to kind of help with this. If you notice, whenever you're watching certain ads, the candidate is supposed to go in there as, I'm such and such and I approve this message. They thought that, if the person is tied to that specific message, it would give more accountability to that. But then you run into this weird gray area where it's like, okay, these PACs are supposed to be operating independently, yet the candidate is also involved because they're in these commercials. It just seems kind of gray, kind of weirdy area, at least to me. And so, looking at some of these numbers, there's, the biggest spender happens to be, PACs that are making ads specifically for Republicans or conservatives. Now, for Democrats, you're looking at 68. There's a reason for that because they're mainly doing different types of ads. But they lean more conservative as far as the super PACs are concerned. And I would say the biggest reason why is because of one of the more well-known super PACs, which is Make America Great Again. That's a super PAC, and they've been pumping ads and things of that nature. Again, we're still talking about some massive numbers here. I mean, that's $467 million. This chart is also a very interesting chart, and it is the difference between disbursements and the direct candidate expenditures. So this includes both super PACs and PACs. And there's a lot of interesting names on this chart. You have Mike Huckabee has a super PAC, which I thought was interesting. The top 50, there's a lot of money being spent, as I've already said earlier. The biggest one, which because they're not giving money directly to candidates, I assume this is a super PAC, and that is Emily's List. Emily's List has given over $37 million in disbursements. Next to them would be AIPAC. Now, AIPAC is a little different because AIPAC is given directly to candidates, and that number is 28 million. So when Cori Bush was saying that her opponent mainly won because of AIPAC, and his campaign was almost all funded by AIPAC. AIPAC has been giving a lot of money to candidates. They are not really focused on political party. They're more focused on their specific agenda, which we'll go into a little bit later. But again, I mentioned Make America Great Again. They're number 4 on this list. They've been shelling out some cash, $14 million. You also see organizations like the Federation of Teachers. You see Progressive Takeover, United Food and Commercial Workers, Drive, which is, it looks like that might be bipartisan. And so there's a lot of different interest groups. California Real Estate Political Action Committee. That was kind of surprising. They've spent about $8 or $7 million. And so that's kind of strange. But I really wanted to talk about the two big guys or gals. So AIPAC, right? If you guys don't know AIPAC, that's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And they're basically a pro-Israel lobby group. They're considered one of the most powerful lobby groups in the United States, especially in Washington, D.C. Their main mission is to strengthen, protect, and promote the U.S.-Israel relationship. And their influence has been criticized by some who argue that they have too much influence on U.S. foreign policy. One could say they had massive influence during the Bush administration, especially during the neocon era, and I guess it's not gone yet. There's still neocons that exist, but quick to go to war. The vast majority of folks who were kind of architecting the strategy and plans of the war on terror were Jewish individuals. Not saying that they were attached to AIPAC, but there's a correlation there. And so you could make an argument that, their influence on foreign policy, is it representative of the full American populace? And do they have too much influence? Or is the people who are actually supporters of this particular cause, is that representative of all of America? So you can make an argument there. I went on to their official website, and the biggest thing that struck out to me was towards the end of this paragraph. This is on kind of the bottom of their page, of the webpage, where it said that 98% of AIPAC-backed candidates won their general election races in 2022. That's a huge, that's almost 100%. And so to say that they don't have any influence, it would just be wrong. They are making sure that their voice is being heard, and that regardless of which candidate that is, whether it's a Republican candidate or a Democrat candidate, that, that candidate is in support of Israel. And so I don't know what Cori Bush has been saying in her campaign. It seems like she started deviating away from pro-Israel. And I know some of other elected officials have done so as well, especially after the events of, what's happening in the Gaza Strip and whatnot. What that could mean is the end of your time as a representative, because if you are not pro-Israel and your candidate on the other side, your opponent is, that person has AIPAC to back them up. And the chances of them actually winning that election are great based off of the numbers that AIPAC has been given. And so, yeah, that's something to think about. And it's kind of going into some of their numbers. Over the last couple of years, especially after COVID, we've seen a massive influx in money being contributed to this organization and spending from this organization. This year, ending in July 16, they've already received $56 million. So it's a crazy amount of money, honestly. It doesn't really make any sense, but that's what it is. The next one I wanted to look into was Emily's List. I didn't know much about Emily's List. AIPAC has had criticisms in the media. Emily's List, not so much. People who are familiar with politics tend to know Emily's List. I know I talked to Mel about this, so she's worked in that space before. She knew of Emily's List. And so basically, to kind of sum up what their mission is, they're supporters of democratic pro-choice women. That is the main thing. And when you go to their website, you see their 4 pillars, right? They want to make sure that there's more women in office on, the every level of government, and they want to make sure that those women are pro-choice supporters. So again, when we saw the chart earlier, they've already spent in this little cycle here $37 million on distributions. Those are primarily ads. And their influence is questionable, mainly just because, is it representative of women entirely? Pro-choice, I know the abortion thing is very touchy for this folks, and I've always questioned why abortion is such a big conversation. But if you're dumping $37 million towards abortion, I can see why it's always a conversation that we're having. But the question I would ask is this a majority opinion of women across the board, or is it a specific woman's issue? That would be the question I would ask, and feel free to put your comments down in the comment section below what you think about that. But I found that very interesting. And so that's a part of their mission. In more recent time, they have wanted to make an emphasis on their staff and the fact that they're inclusive. And so they made it a point to make sure that they let everybody know that they have almost 30% LGBTQ staff members that work for them, that they've given certain spots to Black women. When I looked into, right there's on the other side of that chart on the left, the vast majority of their LGBTQ staff members are identified as bi. Why this is relevant? It could give us some indication on some of the policies that this PAC will push. In addition to pro-choice, you could say that maybe they're also pro LGBTQ and would be promoting pro LGBTQ content in their ads. And so I haven't seen personally any of their material beyond just some data points, but that could be something that you could derive based off of just the makeup of the group. And one of the biggest things with Emily's List is they're a massive supporter of Kamala Harris, which is not very surprising, but that is something that they have put on their website. This is a picture directly from their website with Kamala Harris. She has her own page on Emily List's website, and she wants to make sure that, or not she, but Emily's List wants to make sure that Harris is going to stay on her pro-choice viewpoint and will help with abortions, and well, not help with abortions, but help promote the policy of getting abortions, and I imagine federally, so across the nation. Now, this made me think a little bit. I was like, okay, it's not surprising you guys back Harris, but it did make me think about Joe Biden and the debacle that happened and the random, not really random, but just like really fast dropping of Joe. And so AOC said something very interesting during one of her Instagram lives. And I wanted to play that real quick.
Opinion. What I'm saying is like the mechanisms by which this decision is being made is concerning me. And when I'm talking to folks in rooms, I hear my donor this, my donor that.
Yep.
Those are the inputs
Yep.
that I am hearing reflected by my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my voters this, my voters that. Every once in a blue moon. But from what I am hearing, my inputs a lot is donor, donor, donor. 2 million, like there was like some, it's like big donors are saying this, big donors are saying that, big donors, like I could give 2 damns about.
Yeah,
what
she
a
being
bunch
careful.
of
Go ahead and
rich
cuss,
people
girl.
think.
Go ahead and cuss.
What I care about is about what the working class thinks, and like what a lot of people not on social media think, to be honest.
So, I want to bring that up because the debate, he did not have a good performance during the debate. And we've covered that, right, on our show. But it seemed like that at that time, hey, maybe this was an off day. We're still going to ride with Joe. But, the issues of him being old weren't new. He's been old, right? My question is, why didn't the Democratic Party address this last year, actually have a legit primary to allow the voters to have their voice be heard on who they would like for them to be, what person they would want to represent them on the national stage. And instead what we got was we're going to stay with Joe. And then something happened after that debate and after that performance where as AOC said, the donors were like, hey, look, we're going to withhold money if y'all don't make an adjustment here. And then in comes Harris as the top of the ticket, primarily just because what other options you really had? You didn't really have a lot of options. You don't have a lot of time. You also have issues with using Joe Biden's current existing campaign funds, and you wouldn't just be able to just give those funds to someone else. There's some legal issues there, and so Harris is already on the ticket, so she would be able to spend those funds as far as how that was explained to me. And so Harris happens to be your backup button, emergency brake, but she was not the person that anybody really wanted. I think, obviously she's ran for president before. She didn't win that primary at that time. Most people, if you would ask them if they were honest with you, she would not be their first choice. But because of this situation, she's what we got, and so we're going to ride with that. But to me, what sticks out to me the most is the fact that the main driver behind this decision was the donors. It was the people of money. And if you don't think that that was the case, the fact that she was able to raise $200 million in the first week of this change was, to me, true indication that whoever the powers that be who have the cash were like, look, we're withholding money until y'all make a change. And as soon as you made the change, the floodgates just opened. You know, in the full month of July, she raised $310 million. I mean, we're not talking about chump change. This is in a month. Again, 200 of that was in the first week. And so, you know, the issue that I have with all of that, and you know, just to bring everything home, I don't think the Supreme Court has done a very good job of not limiting the influence of money. I remember it was Justice White, I think, from the very first Supreme Court case that we covered in this video, that talked about, you know, how money can corrupt our government and it will overshadow the rights of those who don't have money. And so it all becomes into who has the most money, has the biggest voice and the biggest influence. And I don't see how we have stopped that from happening. And this even goes into the, you know, our current Democratic, you know, candidate for president. She was a result of money. You know, she was not voted on by the populace or just the Democratic Party's people. She was selected as we want someone else, and if you don't move on a different person, we're going to withhold cash. And so cash is king, as it's always been. He who has the gold makes the rules. That's an old adage. And, you know, am I surprised at any of this? I'm not. It's just more of, I like people to be honest. You know, I would like us to just be real about the situation that we're in. And this is what it is. Like, this money runs this thing that we call elections. And it costs money to run a campaign. And when you think of why our candidates are not as good as they could be, or why such and such didn't run, or things like that, or a person changed when they got into office, I imagine a lot of that has to do with lobbyists, PACs, all these different elements of money that is influencing people's decisions. If you know that you have to run for office in 2 years, and, you know, what do? Hey, I'm going to stick to my guns, and I'm going to make sure that, you know, I represent the people who I'm supposed to represent, and the people who can't represent themselves, or the people who don't have a strong voice, or just the general populace. Even though my district might be a poor district, but I represent their voice. Or are you going to be like, yo, who's going to give me the biggest bag? And, you know, whatever it is they say, that's the policies I'm going to push. Do we really have a say in our democracy? That is the question that I have. I know a lot of you guys always want solutions to these problems, but some problems are too complicated to have a simple solution. I mean, I don't think just completely tearing apart the system is appropriate. I don't think that's going to yield the results that we would want. But there is something to be said about the role that money plays, and maybe we need to move to some type of system where maybe everyone gets a blanket set of cash to run for office, and you use that, and, you know, or we have some other type of system where it's like almost like when you're voting for Pro Bowl, right? You have everybody's name on on a web page, and it's encrypted, and you have to do all these different things to sign in, and then you select your thing based off of a profile sheet of the person, and then you go with that. I don't know. Those are just ideas. I don't know if that's going to fix this problem, but it is something that we got to discuss, and you know, or we just accept that this is what it is, and we accept whatever we receive. That's also an option as well. I don't know. Well, you guys let me know what you think. As always, we encourage everyone to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.